America's public enemy number one in the United States is drug abuse. In order to fight and defeat this enemy, it is necessary to wage a new all-out offensive. I've asked the Congress to provide the legislative authority and the funds to fuel this kind of an offensive. This problem is now being handled.
Many of you may be thinking, well, drugs don't concern me, but it does concern you.
We have it on the streets of every major city in this country. And you know who's feeding and supporting the enemy? The casual drug user.
Leading medical researchers are coming to the conclusion that marijuana, pot, grass, whatever you want to call it, is probably the most dangerous drug in the United States, and we haven't begun to find out all of the ill effects, but they are permanent ill effects.
I feel that it's a great travesty of justice. I feel that the jury in Simi Valley gave the okay to continue to abuse and oppress and suppress black people in this country. I feel that there is an undercurrent of racism and that the system is rotten to the core.
If we're going to have a successful offensive, we need more money.
You know, I don't understand this. I talked with one lady, it seems like to me the media wants to hype violence. You know, it's not about violence, but if it comes to that, then that's something we have to deal with when it comes about.
In order to defeat this enemy, which is causing such great concern, and correctly so, to so many American families, money will be provided to the extent that it is necessary and to the extent that it will be useful.
Now you can see why drug abuse concerns every one of us, all the American family.
Fundamentally, it is essential for the American people to be alerted to this danger, to recognize that it is a danger that will not pass with the passing of the war in Vietnam, which has brought to our attention the fact that a number of young Americans have become addicts as they serve abroad, whether in Vietnam or Europe or other places. Because the problem existed before we became involved in Vietnam, it will continue to exist afterwards, and that is why this offensive deals with the problem there in Europe, but will then go on to deal with the problem throughout America.
The bloodiest day yet in Philippines President Rodrigo Duterte's war on drugs. 32 people killed in dozens of anti-drug operations in Bulacan, a province north of the capital Manila. Duterte welcomed the bloodshed, saying, "Let's kill another 32 every day. Maybe we can reduce what ails this country."
There are two occupations here, sifting through rubbish and scrap to try and salvage anything that can be resold, and then drugs. And since President Duterte came to power, there's been a new fact of life here as well. That when the sun goes down, the killings start.
Then, after just an hour or so, a body hauled off. This time a man in his 20s, known to his neighbours as But But. For all the blood, the president and his drug war remain widely popular, and those he wants dead know this only too well.
Hitler massacred 3 million Jews. Now, there's a 3 million drug addicts. I'd be happy to slaughter them. At least, if Germany had Hitler, the Philippines would have, but, you know, my victims, I would like to be all criminals.
But activists and human rights groups say police often execute suspects and plant drugs and guns at the scene.
This woman sells meth and uses what she has left over herself.
Tuwing gabi nga, di ba? Sa ganyang patayan sa amin, hindi na po ako natutulog ng maayos. Kunting taho lang ng aso na kinakabahan na ako. Lahat kabado ako.
Masakit, wala po silang mga human rights para po sila pumamatay lang ng tao. Katulad po sa kapatid ko, para lang silang pumatay ng hayop.
At the North Cemetery in Manila, the coffins just keep coming, laying bare the toll of President Duterte's crackdown on crime. She stares at her father's coffin as her mother tells me how he died.
You are free to kill the idiots.
Pinahirapan nila, lumalapit ako.
He was killed in a police drugs raid last week, she says, rounded up with other suspected users and shot against a wall.
The past 2 weeks have been the deadliest of the year-long war, with over 90 people killed in one 3-day span, 32 of them in a single raid. The public has been largely supportive of Duterte's ruthless methods, but after the police killing of high school student Kian de los Santos, that may finally be changing.
Justice for Kian! Justice for all!
Marami naman pong paraan para masumpo yung bagay na droga.
Raid and shoot if they resist arrest. Those were the orders given to the national police by Indonesian President Joko Widodo, who is now taking firmer actions to tackle the country's escalating narcotics problem.
The latest out of Indonesia, where reports indicate the government executed 4 prisoners at this detention facility early Friday morning. They were sentenced to death by firing squad over drug-related offenses. It is a decision harshly criticized by humanitarian groups all over the world.
But activists are raising concerns over this war on drugs that many believe is inspired by Filipino President Rodrigo Duterte.
Indonesia's drug crisis is far worse than the Philippines. We have our own approach of handling the issue based on the country's laws. But the way Duterte handles the issue affects us as well. The Philippines is our neighbor, so drug networks over there can easily shift to Indonesia. So we have to be cautious and keep an eye out on Duterte.
Imagine, every day, we have 50 people died because of narcotics, because of drugs. In 1 year, it's 18,000 people who died because of narcotics. And we are not going to compromise for drug dealers, no compromise.
Yeah, tell him I love him. You're Josh. Tell my girlfriend I love her too. And then it's Greg.
Bali 9 ringleaders Mayuran Sukumaran and Andrew Chan have pleaded in court in the local Indonesian language, begging that their lives be spared.
The accused ringleaders apologised to the court, asking the judges to consider how they've tried to rehabilitate themselves. Their lawyers argue that based on human rights, no one should face a firing squad except in the most serious cases. They're asking instead for 20 years jail.
2 Australian drug smugglers are a step closer to the firing squad, with the announcement today that they'll be moved from their Bali prison this week. Andrew Chan and Myuran Sukumaran will be taken to the island where death row prisoners are executed.
The Prime Minister Tony Abbott's again written to the Indonesian President asking for mercy.
I think right now millions of Australians are feeling sick in their guts at the prospect of execution for these 2. This is contrary to Indonesia's national interest and it's contrary to Indonesia's best values.
Good morning. Indonesian media is reporting that Australia's Bali 9 ringleaders, Andrew Chan and Myuran Sukumaran, have been executed by firing squad.
So, Rick, local media are reporting that these executions have gone ahead and 8 people have been killed, including Andrew Chan and Myuran Sukumaran.
President Jokowi was unmoved, despite international pleas for clemency.
The execution of death row inmates earlier this year prompted strong international condemnation of the new government. But President Joko Widodo was undeterred and said there would be no clemency for any drug convicts on death row.
For more than 10 years, a main mission of Mexico's armed forces has been combating powerful drug trafficking organizations. But until now, the country has had no legal framework for allowing the armed forces to carry out that task. Former Mexican President Felipe Calderón was the first to send large numbers of troops to fight drug traffickers back in late 2006. Since then, more than 200,000 people have been killed in the nation's drug war, and more than 30,000 have gone missing.
The notorious drug lord El Chapo, who escaped months ago into that mile-long tunnel carved beneath his prison cell with full electricity and a motorcycle waiting, tonight captured.
In Lisbon, some of Portugal's most damaged, dependent people are trying to put their lives back together. In all of Portugal, fewer than 30 people a year now die from drug overdoses. Arguably, no place in the world has had as much success dealing with addictions and overdoses as Portugal. Its system emphasizes harm reduction, treatment, and rehabilitation. And at the center of it is the idea that drug use is a health problem, not a crime.
From the crackdown on drugs on city streets to the narco wars in Latin America, an international commission has concluded the war on drugs has done little to protect society.
The US jails more people than any other country. With 5% of the global population, it accounts for 25% of those behind bars worldwide. About half of those in federal prison are there as a result of drug-related offenses.
Now, California's prisons are in an overcrowding crisis. It's so bad, the governor is now considering sending some of the inmates to other states to serve out their terms.
Well, in fact, here in the U.S., we're dealing with prison population overflow, and many states are looking at new ways of dealing with prison issues.
Very strict drug laws with mandatory sentences were imposed in the 70s, and what that did was fill up the prisons to a certain extent.
Too many Americans go to too many prisons for far too long and for no truly good law enforcement reason.
I think 800,000 people who are in prison for smoking marijuana today in America. I mean, an enormous amount of people. It would be, so much better if they were out of prison being useful members of society.
Men in cages. At DVI, it's normal. What's not normal is that the prison was designed to process 25 inmates a week. Now it's up to 500.
It's bad living conditions in here. This ain't no way to keep no individual or human being.
If the problems on the inside aren't solved, problems on the outside won't be either.
We have the largest prison system on the planet. And I would like to point out one of the most efficient prison systems on the planet. And in that huge, efficient prison system, we do not have one drug-free prison in America.
The story of the militarization of American policing begins in many ways in Los Angeles. That is the first police department to start incorporating the methods of counterinsurgency from America's foreign wars directly into policing.
We are out there enforcing morality when we enforce drug laws, and that is not our job. We were not trained to do it. We are not capable of doing it. And if anything else, you see the failure of it. We've been doing this for over 40 years since Nixon kicked it off, and the drugs are more available, purer quality, and cheaper than they've ever been before on the streets of America. Plus, we've destroyed more lives than the drugs have by incarcerating people and hanging felony convictions on them and denying them college educations, denying them jobs for no good reason.
The police were being told for now 20 years that they were fighting a war, that more and more of the public was the enemy, and thus war is the appropriate set of methodology. The country was given a choice, and what happened was it doubled down on the war on drugs.
What you talking about? Don't move, bro. Stop. What I did?
I'm saying what I did, son. Don't fucking move. I'm gonna shoot your fucking ass, bitch. Put your fucking hands on the car. Put your hands on the car. I'm gonna shoot you in your fucking head. You understand me? Don't you fucking move. I'm gonna shoot you in your fucking head. You hear me? Don't you fucking move. Stupid motherfucker.
There are disturbing patterns of excessive force on part of police officers, especially towards African Americans and other persons of color, which seem to demonstrate that the current mechanisms of accountability are insufficient.
The UN committee also asked about what the United States is doing to stop the militarization of police. An apparent reference to the way the police responded to the protests that followed Michael Brown's death. The U.S. delegation responded saying that that program is under review.
Now nationwide, some calling for the legalization of drugs.
Legalization of drugs is not about the drugs. It is about the gangsterism and terrorism that is supported by the illegal marketplace in this country.
You know, over the last 2 years, I've become part of something called the Global Drug Commission. We've examined all the facts, and the Commission as a whole have said that we believe that drugs should be treated as a health problem and not a criminal problem.
After 13 months planning, police have staged the state's biggest ever raid targeting Sydney's alleged drug kings.
31 people have been arrested, among them well-known names. Besides drugs, police have seized millions in luxury cars, homes, even a helicopter.
The ice epidemic in Australia is now critical. According to the National Drug and Alcohol Research Centre, 75% of drug users have taken ice in the last 6 months. That's up 20% in 1 year and clearly shows it's fast becoming the drug of choice.
Ice is the most destructive illicit drug on our market.
According to the Australian Crime Commission, at least 7% of Australians over the age of 14 have tried methamphetamine.
Australia's ice problem is out of control, an epidemic that the government, the law and communities are struggling to beat.
Australia is hot on the heels of America's deadly prescription drug crisis.
New research reveals more Australians now die from legally prescribed medication than illegally bought drugs.
The latest figures sparking warnings of an epidemic similar to the United States, where opioids kill more people under 50 than anything else.
While other countries such as the US have similar ice problems, the rate at which Australians are taking up the drug has never before been seen.
I think it's likely to get worse. I think the government will get a bit of a wake-up call with these recent statistics. There's been a 5-fold increase in the availability of opioids in the last 15 years.
Australian federal and state leaders have agreed to a unified approach to tackling the scourge of a problem, which is a start.
History tells us that it'll have minimal impact. It'll have some, but it'll be minimal because of the volume that comes through.
In the period 2010 to 2013, ice or crystal meth use across Australia more than doubled from 12.4% to 25.3%.
There is a rhythm to life. We sleep at night and wake in the morning. With Ambien, you fall asleep fast, stay asleep longer, and generally wake without feeling groggy the next morning. No wonder Ambien is the #1 prescribed sleep aid in America. Until you know how Ambien will affect you, you shouldn't drive or operate machinery. Side effects may include drowsiness, dizziness, and diarrhea. You shouldn't take it with alcohol. Patients who abuse prescription sleep aids may become dependent. Prescription sleep aids are most often taken for 7 to 10 days as needed. Talk to your doctor about Ambien. Ambien works like a dream.
Every day brings another story about the depth of this country's opioid crisis. Overdoses up, emergency services overwhelmed, another family burying a loved one.
Opioid use here in the U.S. is the highest it's ever been. In fact, a recent study finds that Phoenix ranks in the top 10 for opioid distribution.
And a lot of people are now turning to maybe natural remedies to get some help, including medicinal cannabis.
The word epidemic gets used a lot these days, but it may be the case that that word is not strong enough to describe this country's recent surge in opioid addiction.
people still consider it, a bad behavior, and it's very stigmatized. And I'm sure that a lot of people who are struggling with opioid addiction or other substance abuse problems, feel ashamed.
It's important to recognize that today we are seeing more people killed because of opioid overdose than traffic accidents.
More Americans are dying because of drugs than ever before. We've never seen anything like this. 2016 saw 64,000 Americans die of drug overdoses.
With the stroke of a pen today, President Trump declared the opioid epidemic the worst drug crisis in American history.
I am directing all executive agencies to use every appropriate emergency authority to fight the opioid crisis. It's a national emergency. We're going to spend a lot of time, a lot of effort, and a lot of money.
There's a big, wonderful world out there for you. It belongs to you. Our country needs you, but it needs you to be clear-eyed and clear-minded.